we're going to be giving a whole lot of great information about Louise Nevelson. Anyway, just the housekeeping aspects of things. If you have your cell phone with you, if you could turn that to vibrate or turn it off, that would be appreciated, not to disturb Jamie. And if you need a restroom, it's right across the hall over there. And I'm going to start by saying we want to thank those people that make all of this possible for us. I want to thank Art Bridges, the J.L. Betzel Foundation, Ben May Charitable Trust, the City of Mobile, Mobile County Commission, Alabama State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts to make our exhibitions and these programs possible. So our speaker this evening is Jaime DeSimone, who I just met a little bit ago. And Jaime is the chief curator at the Farnsworth Art Museum. She specializes in contemporary art and feminist art history. Jaime has curated over 40 exhibitions and is the recipient of the 2019 Curatorial Research Fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. That's a big mouthful. And the Fulbright Scholar in 2022. She holds degrees in art history from both American University and Bates College. She is the chief curator at the Farnsworth Art Museum, which is located in Rockland, Maine, and has one of the largest collections of Louise Nevelson work anywhere, with over 80 paintings, drawings, prints, sculptures, and jewelry. The exhibition, Louise Nevelson, Dawn to Dusk, currently on view in our gallery upstairs. When the show is, or when the talk is done, if you want to walk up and take a look, if you haven't seen it, please do. And that show has been created from selections from that vast and exciting collection at the Farnsworth. We're excited to have Jaime here tonight and hear her insights and information. And so please welcome Jaime DeSimone.
I'm so grateful to the Mobile Museum of Art for hosting this exhibition and welcoming me here to talk to this incredible person you're seeing on this screen. Just look at her. She is fierce. She's iconic. This photograph was taken by Richard Avedon in 1975, right around the time when she receives her very first exhibition at the Farnsworth Art Museum. And what you can't see in this photo is she's wearing two necklaces that she made. So I'm sure curators and you are always asked, who's your favorite artist? What artwork do you like right now? You're not supposed to pick favorites, but I really, really like the work of Louise Nevelson. So we are going to talk a lot about her tonight, and I'm really excited to share some insights with you that maybe will bring the exhibition upstairs to life. We're going to start with her family. Her family's adopted hometown of Rockland, Maine. Her increasing prominence, supported by museum exhibitions, acquisitions, and press. And so that my hope is that you'll take away how significant museums have been, like the Farnsworth, throughout her career, and how, as you could see in that very first photograph by Avedon, what a dominant force she was and continues to be in American art history. Maybe some of you have children, maybe some of you are artists. Her family saved a lot of her childhood drawings, and what's unique about this one, this was made around 1905 when her family first came to Rockland, Maine. This is in the Archives of American Art, and I think it's always nice to see where someone comes from. And particularly because there's this mythology that Nevelson has created around herself. If you read any interviews, if you listen to any of her, she is one of those artists who spins a great tale. And in fact, there's some quotes up in the gallery that I love, and I think there's some truth of them, that she was destined to be an artist. A lot of teachers in her life identified or kind of claimed that for her, calling her an artist at a young age. And you can see here She even says that she was going to be an artist. She's in the library once, and a librarian asks her what you're going to be. She says artist, and then she retracts that and says, no, actually, I'm going to be a sculptor because I don't want color to help me. Of course, this is an adult looking back on her childhood, so we have to take that into account, that we don't actually know if that is truth or if that is Nevelson creating that mythology around her artistic identity. But what we do know is something like this, and that librarian tale having a little truth to it, is that in the Rockland Public Library is one of the first places that she becomes introduced to art. A young Nevelson around 1932, very different from the one we saw at the beginning. In 1920, as you read in the gallery too, she marries Charles Nevelson, a wealthy executive in the shipping industry. For her, she is very clear, if you read her biographies, that she told him she's going to be an artist, they're going to move to New York, she has to support her. And for many ways, this was her escape from Maine. She was very excited to follow her path and get to New York City, but unfortunately she found marriage to be quite stifling because her husband and her in-laws had the expectation that she would follow traditional gender roles of an upper middle class lifestyle, where she, on the other hand, wanted to prioritize being an artist and being in a studio. Nonetheless, her and her husband did have a son 2 years later, Mike, who we'll learn a little bit about later. But in 1931, which is really unconventional for that time, their relationship ends. She dissolves that marriage to go on and fulfill art full-time. We have in the collection some very early drawings from this period that you're seeing here, this classical figure painting, which is also up on view in the gallery, so I really encourage you to see these front and center. But this is classical academic training, but particularly in this drawing on the far left, what we study at the museum is that stacking of those figureheads on that left column and how perhaps the urban environment is even influencing the figure drawing in person that ultimately ends up in the way she's informing the arrangement of fruit boxes in her sculptures. At the Art Students League, she's studying with Kenneth Hayes Miller. She's also studying with Hans Hofmann, the renowned artist and teacher who champions, these are her, this is the blessing of having archives, her enrollment papers in classes that she's taking at the Art Students League. And what I think is so interesting too about our collection, when she's first painting and studying with Hans Hofmann, she's painting Maine. So she's looking back on memories of Maine, Old Country Road. So these windy streets, these block houses, the congestion of these houses, again, I think is really interesting when we will start looking at her first room environment and how she's thinking about assemblage. And some of that is because of Hofmann and his encouragement of this theory of push and pull, putting planes of color down front and back, creating spatial depth in form. She follows Hofmann to Munich, but she notes in some of her biographies, and you can see now she's painting the urban environment where she is. She's expanding this idea that Hofmann is encouraging her. Hofmann is really applauding her for her figurative paintings. You can see some of those up in the galleries as well. And again here, she's painting herself. We believe these to be self-portraits. And the painting on the right, I'm just reiterating this over and over again because in her sculptures, you'll see these reconfigurations except turning into monochromatic black, white, or gold boxes, and particularly in the background on the right. She's now combined the urban environment with the figure on top, and eventually she's going to break out of that one-dimensional plane into three-dimensional space. But I want to pause here because before she really dives into these wood constructions, she is starting to work on tabletops in figures. They resemble sometimes animals, other things from nature. In this piece, Bronze Bird is particularly important because it's the first acquisition at the Farnsworth Art Museum in 1955, made only a few years earlier in 1952. The museum itself opens in 1948, so this is a very early acquisition for the museum, and this is through the support of the Federation of Modern Painters and Sculptors. We know this because in our own object records, museums love keeping paper, they love keeping files and correspondence. And Harold Weston, who is the president of this organization, reaches out to the director at that time and says, makes this proclamation that she's one of the greatest living artists with a national reputation who considers Rockland as part of her origin, so it seems only suitable that the museum should acquire this. Just like this, in a different arrangement. Why I wanted to show this arrangement, though, it's believed when these works were first given to the museum and shown at the Farnsworth in 1979, that Nevelson herself arranged them this way. So when we reinstalled the collection in 2023, we looked back at installation photographs and put them in this configuration, so you can see them kind of in conversation together here. The work on the left, Black Magistry, is really important, similar to Black Bronze, also made in 1955. It was selected to be included in the Whitney Museum of American Art annual exhibition of contemporary American sculpture, waters, and drawings. And what is interesting as we trace the chronology of Nevelson's exhibition history and acquisition history, the Farnsworth and the Museum of Modern Art and the Whitney Museum of Art create this kind of supportive triangle between the three organizations for many different reasons. So this work on the left goes into the Whitney's collection just a couple years after the Farnsworth test through the same organization who reached out to ours. So there is kind of like the patron support system that many artists have, same organization upholding her, recommending her. Again, it's really hard at this time after the war period for artists to get support, and they're recommending her to be not only in the show but in the collection. So she continues to come back to Maine, although very periodically in her life, and that's because her brother Nathan owns the Thorndike Hotel, this historic building that you're seeing here in downtown Rockland, right on Main Street. And Nathan is one of his biggest cheerleaders. In fact, in the lobby, if you look and research, he has different works of hers on display as if the hotel lobby is a gallery. And what's so important here is you see Nevelson's son Mike arranging this piece called Sky Cathedral. And this is believed to be one of her earliest wall box sculptures. And yet it is showing here in Rockland, Maine. And it's a pivotal moment. People date this piece to speaking about architectural space. It's known that she termed the word worldscapes. It hung at the hotel for 10 years before it was bought by a pair of American collectors, and it is now in the Museum of the San Jose Museum of Art collection. That work really transitions her to an important moment where she is invited and continues to start showing with Grand Central Moderns Gallery in New York. This piece, Moon Garden +1, is considered a groundbreaking environmental installation that really is a turning point in modern sculpture. This is January 1958. Consisted, as you can see here, assemblages of found ground wood arranged throughout the gallery and of course painted entirely black. Nevelson, like all of the pieces at this time, it's discarded pieces of wood. If you look closely, you can see furniture fragment, architectural scraps, other everyday material, and she transforms them into a large-scale artistic environment. Rather than presenting a single sculpture on a pedestal, like we saw some of the earlier pictures, this fills the space, and it surrounds the viewer. The other thing that people find very interesting in the title is that she calls it a garden. We don't see a lot of the garden. There's no literal plants or landscape imagery in it, but we're exploring this monochromatic work, and we're experiencing it how maybe you might experience your own garden. And now, 60 years later, people still look to this work as a real powerful example of beauty, of meaning, and really the potential of everyday materials to move forward. But, we can say that in hindsight, but the question I always think about is how was it received at that time? And, art press, of course, sure, we're looking at it, but there was also mainstream magazines who were featuring it. So what you're seeing here is Life magazine. She's portrayed as a sorceress, almost a witch, painted green. I didn't date The Wizard of Oz here, but I'm a little curious of when that came out. And these critics and popular journalists, popular culture magazines really struggled to classify her work as either sculpture or architecture. They described it instead as symbolic worlds. We, of course, talked about how it's installation art, but Time described this as entering a misty, mystic haze of blue light filled with eerie black forms. And then what is unique about this review at the time, unlike how they would review male artists of the period, they talk about what she was physically wearing. She was wrapped in a heavy black wool coat. She was 57 years old. She seemed nervous as she explained the piece. And to me, those are very gendered ways of explaining the artwork. But what they did say in this article is that Nevelson said, this is the universe, the stars, the moon, and you and I and everyone. These are some details of the pictures that you're seeing, which I find quite fascinating because they're showing the artist at work in her studio. Perhaps they're posed, maybe not, but they're showing how laborious it is to move some of these large wooden pieces around, or her dipping them in the paint cans, how she's living with discarded wooden decoys in her bathroom of all places. But the article goes on to talk about the cost of the work of art. The entire Moon Garden piece was priced at $18,000, but they criticize her, say there was no one interested in it, so she started selling off the individual boxes, but only 7 were sold. So they wanted everyone to know that, of course. But what we'll learn about Nevelson is that pieces over time, like this one, and the one that is referenced upstairs in the 16 American show, she repurposes those materials, and we'll see some examples of that. What is unique about that work, Moon Garden is one, is those were all found works. So if we look at that carefully, all the crates are fruit kind of boxes and other wooden boxes that she found or were used for other shops or goods and whatnot. Spindles, other pieces of wood that she would cut down, table legs, maybe dollies, Victorian mortars, other pieces of just, trash perhaps. But then if we jump forward in the same year, construction maybe gets a little more refined, and you'll see upstairs in the exhibition an endless column that is built over an extensive period of time. She starts ordering boxes and parts of wood, so they are much more refined and orderly, and part of that is just from the support that she has. But this is another example of building on the same idea of Sky Cathedral, and this speaks to, at the same time of making the work and having and receiving support and recognition from a different major museum, being the Museum of Modern Art in New York, who acquired it around the same time it was made, and she was talking about how she learns more about the technique and the forms. This consists of almost 60 compartments. It combines different pieces of wood. This, unlike Moon Garden +1, which is a room environment, this is entirely wall-based. So like some of the works you're seeing upstairs, she's starting to experiment with different configurations of them. So this, your body experience is kind of on a one-to-one relationship. So these, as the Times article kind of alluded to, she's sewing them up, she's breaking them out, it's breaking apart, they're being reconfigured. This piece in its title harks back to her own feelings and sentiments about marriage. A lot of the white works have this undertone about how she's feeling. They're totemic, they're tall, they're architectural fragments. In her own words, she said it's a white wedding cake, a wedding mirror, a pillow, a transition to marriage with the world. And after it closes, this again is somewhat of a wall-based work with perhaps bride and groom center around them. It is dismantled and recycled into new compositions. And that for her was very cathartic. It was a process that she enjoyed and found reconfigurations, but she holds the same title when doing this. This is Dawn's Wedding Chapel 2, and this is now in the Whitney Museum's collection, and you can see it retains its geometric complexity, its formal cohesiveness, elaborate equilibrium, all of the same components that become what we now know as Nevelson's signature style. And the Whitney really has marked a significant relationship with her. At the same time, just 10 years later in '67, they give Louise Nevelson her first retrospective. This is an installation of that piece here. You can see some more of those wood tabletops. I'm sure there are other shows that show more of the large-scale pieces that we've been looking at. And the Whitney Museum of American Art is actually the largest repository of her holdings. The Farnsworth is just shy by 2 works, so we're very proud of that. And so this piece, or the show, I should say, was a really important moment for her coming off of the 16 Americans to continue the recognition, to get museum experience, particularly as she works solely in wood. And here, as I mentioned before, looking from the difference between Dawn's Wedding Feast to the more kind of structure of these boxes, this is when she starts purchasing things. You can see, in fact, she, in 1969, kind of stopped at a certain moment. This piece was only the center kind of part of it, and eventually she added additional works when she showed this work at the Farnsworth Art Museum. And so that, if you've ever listened to artists talk or heard them or seen them at work, I think for a lot of artists their work is never finished, and she just couldn't help herself when she saw this at the museum and this space was afforded to her. So coming back to Maine in the 70s, this will give you a little sense of her not only social circle and community of artists, but her style. It is believed in 1979 she returned to Maine in a chauffeured limousine from New York City, and that was because her brother, Nathan, who owned the Thorndike Hotel, named a dining room after her. So there was now a Nevelson dining room, and this is her with the great artist Andrew Wyeth there to celebrate on that occasion. And that is when the Farnsworth director at that time, Morris Pelledo, starts to engage her and rebuild this relationship with the hope that some type of exhibition would germinate in years to come, and it did. So what you're seeing here are installation photo shots from 1979. This exhibition is called The Art of Louise Nevelson. It was a traveling exhibition, very much like Stan's remarks tonight. It was supported by the National Endowments of the Arts. And this is the annual report of that year. Over 255 people came to the Farnsworth for a champagne gala reception in the middle of July, which if anyone has ever been to Maine, you would never host that in the winter. So that is the height of the summer. She gave many speaking kind of receptions. The show ran for 2.5 months, and during that period, 2,000 people came to that. She gave press conferences, TV previews, and I think the thing we're most proud of, and what we might watch at the end of this talk so that you can really hear from the artist herself. She was filmed by CBS Sunday Morning, and this is something we're really proud of. They filmed her on site at the museum in downtown Rockland over the course of 4 days, and it screened in both France and Swiss national television. There's a lot of local press at that time, and someone wrote about it and said it was the most exciting cultural event Maine has experienced in the last 2 decades. I'm very jealous that I wasn't there for that at that time. And then this, if you've ever been to a small rural town, this will give you a chuckle. This is the mayor of the city with the museum director and Louise Nevelson Center proclaiming Louise Nevelson Day. So there was a proclamation, and she was given a key to the city. But if you've ever been to Maine or know anything of Maine, lobster is maybe the diet of choice. And not only that, Rockland is the lobster capital of the world. So what she is holding is in fact a lobster gauge. And these text is not all that interesting, but what is, these are more behind the scenes pictures of her and her family and things at the museum. Her family, Nathan, her sister Anita, what comes about of all these conversations is everyone was so enamored and supportive of Louise Nevelson throughout her lifetime that they were very much like Nevelson collecting wood. They were hoarding every article, every press release, every newspaper clipping, every photograph that they could find. And at that time, they decided that they were going to gift this collection of like material to the Farnsworth Art Museum. At the same time, she did donate 87 pieces to the museum. Similarly, she donated a significant gift to the Whitney Museum of American Art. So that is a result of a show that she had at the Whitney in 1980, which you're seeing here on the left. And they recently, if you're following Louise Nevelson leading up to this show, had a major show in 2025. And just to give you a sense of what our installation looked like, slightly different than yours, very smaller space, so I was gasping with joy at the grandness of your galleries. You can just see, and maybe you see some works that aren't here either. And before we hear from her, I want to talk about the very last work that she made that is really an incredible work, and one that she's most recognized for is called Mrs. N's Place. And it's often understood as the culmination of her mature artistic vision. Rather than a single sculpture, it is an immersive environment composed of more than 100 assembled wooden elements painted in black. It's a monumental work that occupied her for roughly 13 years and was unveiled on her 80th birthday. It's the largest work she's ever completed. It's now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is just monumental. You can see it transforms discarded elements of New York into an immersive architectural environment like we talked about. It functions simultaneously as a self-portrait, a monument, and a meditation on memory. And so let's talk about that a little bit. We know it's a self-portrait because of her title, Mrs. N's Palace. The work can be read as an autobiographical environment. We know at this point there's many articles. She's moved studios multiple times. She's living in a place that looks almost identical like this. She surrounded her in this place. So for her making this final work, it's a monument, it's a sanctuary. Some even call it a mausoleum, constructed from materials and forms that defined her career. So she constantly thinks about the urban landscape as a mirror and then transforming that mirror onto her practice. And one of my favorite quotes by her is that she says, "I see New York City as a great big sculpture." I think this epitomizes that. And it also recalls that very early sculpture and environment that is credited as installation art, almost maybe the first one, Moon Garden +1. So when we think about that time span from 1958 to 1980, Mrs. N's Palace is really the piece of resistance to understanding Louise Nevelson. So if you have a chance to go see it, I believe it's usually on permanent view at the Metropolitan